Hey brother! Ben, way back in 2012, we made a video called The Pixar Theory, and it would change our lives and this channel forever. Since then, anytime a new Pixar movie has come out, we've made a full video explaining how it fits into the greater Pixar universe. But it's been 6 years since then, and it's getting a little hard to keep track of everything. So today, we're simplifying things and making a new, updated Pixar theory covering everything from Toy Story through The Incredibles 2. This is the Pixar Theory. Now, if you love Pixar movies as much as we do, you know that Pixar loves to leave Easter eggs in each of their movies as little nods to their other projects. But what if they weren't just little nods? What if instead they were clues? Clues that every movie actually takes place in the same universe. That is the Pixar theory. The idea that every Pixar movie is actually taking place on one giant timeline and telling one huge story. And as ever, I want to point out up front that we did not invent the Pixar theory. It was introduced to the world by a man named John Negroni, who has even written a book about it now. And since then, of course, the internet has gone crazy with it, and there are tons of different versions and interpretations of the Pixar out there, but what you're going to hear today is simply our version, what we have come to accept as canon for the Pixar universe here at Super Carlin Brothers. Let's begin. Now, it is a lot to cover, so we're going to go about it in two ways. First, we're going to tell the entire story of the Pixar theory, and then we're going to talk about how it works and get to the bottom of why it even exists. Now, the movies don't come out in chronological order. We have to figure that out after the fact, but the first one's pretty easy. It happens way back in time, prehistoric times, with The Good Dinosaur, which immediately offers us an explanation for why the Pixar universe, which is so similar to our very own, is just ever so slightly different. And it's right here when the asteroid that should have wiped out the dinosaurs misses. And as a result, the dinosaurs don't go extinct. We can see some primitive looking dinosaurs see the asteroid miss right here, but then millions of years pass. And we're introduced to a bunch of characters who have evolved out of that primitive state and have started developing things like agriculture and ranching. But as we will soon learn in Brave, the dinosaurs don't have a witch to help them change their fate, and so fate eventually catches up with them in the form of crazy weather, which wipes them all out. And when the story starts, you can see it's already been happening for a while. I mean, Arlo goes on this grand journey, but he really doesn't run into that many characters. I mean, life is pretty scarce. The pterodactyls used to hunt well, but now have to follow the storm because it's killing everything in its wake. The T-Rexes, which should just be hunting everything, have started ranching things for food. And their herd is so valuable, it's under constant threat of theft by raptors. Even the pet collector, a Strachiosaurus, which typically travels in herds, is now all alone and obviously quite terrified.
Oh, it's terrifying out here.
Meanwhile, though, even the smallest of humans is doing well surviving the storms, proving their intelligence and resourcefulness early on. But what the Good Dinosaur really helps us establish here is that if you're the kind of animal that can survive for millions of years without human intervention, like, I don't know, rats or pelicans or anything underwater, you are probably going to develop some kind of intelligence in the Pixar universe. But that's not the only way you might gain intelligence. You also might be a human who was turned into a giant bear, like in our next movie, Brave. This takes place centuries and centuries later in medieval Scotland, where a young princess is trying to change her fate by not getting married.
I'll be shooting for my own hand!
Which leads her to follow a path of will-o-wisps into the forest, where she meets a very interesting character indeed. A witch. And the witch's workshop is by far the most curious thing about this movie, especially as it relates to the Pixar theory. For one, it introduces us to magic, which is the first example in the Pixar universe of things not behaving the way they're supposed to. Her crow can talk to humans, her door doesn't work the way I've known doors to work, and the witch herself even seems adept at wielding magic, although she's obviously not the source of the magic. For example, all of the knives and other various sharp objects in the shop quickly turn on the witch when she's about to refuse Merida's generous offer, suggesting they do have some sort of mind of their own. And we'll dive into that a lot deeper later, but for now, the other important piece of magic we see the witch do is the ability to change someone's fate.
That'll change my fate.
And Merida even gives a pretty good description of how fate works. Some say our destiny is tied to the land, as much a part of us as we are of it. Others say fate is woven together like a cloth, so that one's destiny intertwines with many others. It's the one thing we search for, or fight to change. Some never find it, but there are some who are led. Now, as it relates to Brave, Merida is just offering us a little bit of foreshadowing about herself. But as it relates to the greater Pixar theory, it is actually giving us a very interesting clue about the witch. So just bear that in mind as we move forward. But so far we've established that humans and animals are both capable of intelligence. But as we get to our next movie, we'll introduce the third player to the game: the machines. And the power struggle between these three groups, animals, humans, and machines, will pretty much define the middle section of the theory. And I use the word power struggle pretty loosely here because no one's really ever trying to be in power. It's just that different groups rise into it, often at the cost of the others. And honestly, for the animals, their ship sailed with the dinosaurs. They are never really gonna rise back up. For now, let's focus on the introduction of the machines, which happens in The Incredibles, taking place somewhere in the 1950s or 60s. Here we are introduced to the supers, the peak of human existence, who live in a world of constant crime and danger and who do their best to fight it until one day they're outlawed. But not before Mr. Incredible, the very best of all of them, offends his biggest fan, Buddy Pine, aka Syndrome. He does not take it well and spends the rest of his life developing technology that will help him kill the supers so that he can pretend to be one. Slight hiccup, however, the AI he creates to defeat the supers also turns out to be smart enough to defeat him. And although the Incredibles step in and defeat the Omnidroid and kill Syndrome, the damage has been done. Syndrome has introduced artificial intelligence into the world. And this will mark the end of the humans in terms of power, but it will take quite some time, because the machines won't take control right away. Instead, for the next few movies in the timeline, we're going to see the animals continue to get smarter while the humans remain in the driver's seat. Well, except for that one time Dory drives a truck off a cliff. Next up are the Toy Stories, Inside Out, Up, Ratatouille, Finding Nemo, and Finding Dory. Finding Nemo gives us a glimpse back into the world of the animals, and especially undersea, they have been left alone for quite some time and, as a result, have developed quite a bit of intelligence. I mean, they have school systems, traffic lights, and a real estate market, I guess.
A lot of other clownfish had their eyes on this place.
You better believe they did.
And not only that, we see a lone fish successfully circumnavigate the ocean to locate his son, and a separate group of fish successfully overpower a human. While another human looks on reading his Incredibles comic book. I mean, obviously he missed out on that Buzz Lightyear on the ground. What are you doing, kid? Jeez. But not all the animals are out to fend off the humans. Remy the rat in Ratatouille becomes the greatest chef in the world, which is pretty significant because up until that point, cooking was exclusively a human activity. Although to be fair, Remy is sort of the exception to the rule. His father sees humans as the enemy and even names them as such, and he's not wrong. Eventually that's going to be very true. But the information about Remy being a spectacular chef, while mostly kept secret from the public, is known by 4 people at the end of the movie: Colette, Linguini, Anton, and Chef Skinner, who promptly blabs to the press about it. And while most people are obviously grossed out by the rats in the kitchen, a clever person may have noticed that it coincided with renowned critics Anton Ego's stunningly wonderful review of Gusteau's and put 2 and 2 together. So, do we ever see anyone else being served food by animals?
Epsilon is the finest chef I've ever had.
Ah, Charles Muntz, the man literally waging war on animals in the Pixar universe, or maybe just a single animal to be more specific. A prehistoric animal, I might add, which per the Pixar theory you'd expect to be extremely intelligent, and indeed, Kevin is, successfully evading capture for 70 plus years. And Kevin's not just evading anyone, she's evading Charles Muntz, a guy clever enough to realize the potential of his dogs and invent collars that let them talk to him. And again, this totally fits. Animals like fish or rats or Kevins have gone largely ignored by humans and as such have developed intelligence naturally, whereas dogs like Buster we see in Toy Story have not. But Muntz has found the bridge between the two groups and as a result has like hyper intelligent dogs capable of, as we said, cooking food or I don't know, piloting planes. Man, Up is a weird movie sometimes. I guess mostly I don't notice it because I'm watching the movie through so many tears. But Up does introduce some other important aspects of the Pixar theory. Most importantly, BNL, the faceless face of the machines. Let me explain. BNL, aka By and Large, is the company at the beginning of the movie forcing Carl to move out of his house. They are the faceless brand, that's the word I was looking for, of the machines on their rise to power. Yes, for now they have physical humans working for them, but I mean, do you think it's any coincidence that this guy looks like an agent from the Matrix?
Coincidence? I think not!
Exactly, Bernie, you get it! And BNL shows up a lot in Pixar movies, most notably in WALL-E, which we will get to, but also in some other places, like on the batteries of Buzz in Toy Story. Which is not the only connection between Up and Toy Story. You can also see Lotso and the little girl from the daycare in this room right here. Buzz witnesses a grape soda commercial, which happens to have produced the badge Carl wears as the Ellie badge. And then, of course, there's the postcard on Andy's bulletin board from the mysterious Emma Jean, who I do not have time to get into right now, but if you want to see the whole video about her, please click the card. But let's pause on Toy Story for a second, because it's our first great example of how humans are used in the Pixar theory, which is to say, as batteries. How and why the toys are able to come to life and why they fear dying or being forgotten is an interesting question that's been around as long as Toy Story and which has only really gotten a good answer last year in Coco. But we'll get to that. For now, just know that humans are batteries and their energy is required for life in the Pixar universe. Where they are, there is life. Where they are not, there is not. At least when it comes to inorganic things like toys or machines or cars. But when it comes to animals, humans aren't always so great for life, and we see this at the beginning of Finding Dory. After Dory, Marlin, and Nemo arrive in California, they are immediately in the middle of a vast underwater junkyard full of all sorts of trash and shipping containers and a giant bioluminescent squid, which sadly isn't as relevant. It's super cool, but just not relevant. What is relevant is we start to see a glimpse of what is beginning to happen worldwide. Trash. And even though animals have been on the decline for a while, this is really where they start to drop off, because trash is just not good for animal life. Well, unless maybe you're like, I don't know, rats or something, which, hey, wouldn't you know, that's the very next movie in the Pixar timeline. It's like they're planning it. But we've already talked about rats. Let's talk about what happens when pollution gets out of control. This is the setup for WALL-E, that the tiny little city building battery company By and Large has now become so big and so powerful, they have literally taken over the planet and polluted it so bad that humans have to leave while little WALL-E trash compacting robots clean up the mess. So the humans leave for some 700 years, all the animals are dead, and what is left? Cars. Now, you might be thinking, wait, Cars doesn't take place on Earth, right? It's obviously an alternate reality or something. Right? But no, it is definitely the same planet Earth the humans were on. For one, it has all the same places that our planet Earth has, and we get to visit a lot of them in Cars too. But so the question is, why are the cars coming to life? Why are their names so similar to people we know from our time? Why do they have their own timeline? Like, if the Cars movies take place during the 700 years that the humans are gone, then how on earth do they have things like the 1950s? I mean, even if they started their own timeline, that's way too many years. Are they still artificial intelligence? Are they products of By and Large? No. BNL's goal is never to create a race that inhabits the planet. Instead, their goal is to control the humans with consumerism and capitalism, and that means treating them as comfy as possible at any cost. I mean, just look at how they're treating everyone on the Axiom. It's an interesting shift from the AI's first encounter with the humans with the Omnidroid. It's like they realize the better way to control them is just to pamper them into death. Hashtag pampered to death. And of course, what the machines get from it is the human energy, which again, we're going to talk about later. Which brings us back to the cars, which aren't coming to life via AI. Instead, it's very similar to the way the toys come to life, or the way the monsters will later fuel their cities, with human energy. It's similar to the toys, but with a few key differences. Obviously, the cars aren't coming to life while the humans are still around, and unlike toys, they are still cars, so they do need fuel to operate. Also, unlike toys, cars are not designed as something to be brought to life by a child's imagination. It's easy for a child to give personality to a cowboy, or a slinky dog, or a walking rearrangeable potato, but it's less obvious for cars, and thus they don't have built-in personalities. So instead, the cars cars are actually taking on the personalities of their old owners, complete with their memories, but remembered through a carified lens. It would also appear that the cars wake up, if you will, in the same order in which they were cared for, which helps explain why there continues to be new generations of cars as the series progresses. In fact, we even get a hint as to when the real Lightning McQueen must have been alive based on the band-aid this truck driver is wearing in Finding Dory. But the real big important note from Cars 3 that helps draw Cars into the entire Pixar theory is one little line from Cruz when she's driving on the beach.
I didn't want to hit a crab.
I'm sorry, what?
What? It was cute.
Is this an animal that isn't a car in this world? I thought all the animals had died off, but no, there's crabs? Okay. It's seriously like they're planning this stuff because this fits perfect. Do you remember back in Finding Dory, that junkyard scene? Well, guess what happened to be thriving amongst all the trash? Crabs. So it should be no surprise that even though the humans have vacated the planet, they have survived through the pollution and into the world of Cars. But wait, I hear you saying. When we start out in WALL-E, the planet is way more polluted than we see in Cars. There's tons of plant life for the Eves to be going down and reporting back with. Agreed, 2 excellent points, but both are actually pretty easily explained. First of all, the humans may have had to leave way before the planet looks like the way we see it in WALL-E. And second, it's possible that the Eve drones are specifically being sent to areas that have been vastly polluted to see if life has returned and is capable of being lived in again. But really, it doesn't matter because the AI is determined not to return home. Even if the Earth was 100% clean and the Eve drones were coming back time after time with vegetation, they're just not going back. That's Directive A113. Stop the captains from knowing the Earth is safe. It's possible that in WALL-E, this is not even the first time that this has happened, that Otto has just been intercepting all sorts of plants and sending them off into space. And as for the planet getting as brown as we see it at the beginning of WALL-E, well, I think that's what might happen if the only inhabitants of the planet for centuries were nothing but cars. But of course, the cars die off too, because, like we said, without humans, there can't really be life. The cars can survive on fuel alone for a while, but even by Cars 2, there's already an energy crisis. But that brings us back to WALL-E, where one superhuman obsessed little robot finally manages to get a plant delivered to a captain of the Axiom, and they come skyrocketing back to the planet and everything is great. Mostly. After all, they are still returning to a planet that has been subject to a ton of pollution for a very long time, and it seems to have an interesting effect on the humans over the next few thousand years, which is that they eventually evolve into monsters. Which I know sounds crazy, but actually it's not the first time we've seen a human transform into a monster in the Pixar universe. Jack anyone? Now, Jack can of course do it on denied cookie demand, but it does reveal that humans have the potential to make this kind of change under the right circumstances. But guess what the monsters are suffering from, guys? Say it with me, an energy crisis. And so what are they having to harvest to run their cities on? Human energy, or more specifically, human emotions, or even more specifically, human memories. All right, here we go. Finally, we're gonna get to how humans work as batteries. And it starts with the scare shortage, which, if you ask me, makes no sense. I mean, we hear all throughout the movies that both Sully and Randall are so close to breaking the all-time scare record. The 2 best scarers of all time are working at tandem next to each other, and there's a scare shortage?
Kids these days, they just don't get scared like they used to.
Indeed, Waternoose, indeed. In the movie, the solution to this problem is discovering that laugh energy is 10 times more powerful than scream. But I submit to you that this does not make sense because of the point I just made. If the talent is at an all-time high, why is scream at an all-time low? And the answer is because of how the scare floor works, which is to say, time travel. Stay with me, I promise. It makes sense. When the monsters go through the doors, we see them enter the human world. But as we've established, the human world is their world. They are just accessing a point in history when humans were still around because they need their energy to run their cities. Which means when they travel back in time matters. In Monsters, Inc., in the kids' rooms, we see a lot of posters for the newly opened Tomorrowland, and Boo even has a Jessie doll on the floor of her room, suggesting the time frame is around the 50s or a little after. AKA the time of the supers. And remember, in that time, crime was everywhere, so it would make sense sense for fear to be high. So the idea is that when time moves forward in the monster world, it also moves forward at the same rate in the human world. They're just traveling parallel to each other. So as times change in the human world, so does what kind of memory is valuable to the monsters. And post-Incredibles, AI is introduced to the world, which starts making things super easy for the humans until again they eventually are being nearly pampered to death. So it makes sense that after AI is introduced, joy and not fear becomes the valuable memory because it is now the dominant memory. Which is exactly what we see in Inside Out. By the time Riley comes around, a majority of her memory orbs are joy. There's literally just more for the monsters to harvest. And I mean memory specifically and not emotions, because emotions simply color the memories. Inside Out also offers an explanation for why kids specifically are better targets for the monsters. Because as kids, their memories are only colored by a single emotion. But even by the end of the movie, Riley has started to develop a little bit more, and so her memories are starting to be colored by multiple emotions at once, which would obviously be harder to harvest. And it makes sense that of all things, they're using memory as a power source in Pixar, because memory might be the most important aspect of everything. It might be the reason the Pixar theory exists. It's the message they're trying to tell you. In Inside Out, we're introduced to Bing Bong, and his death is quite powerful. Because Riley remembers him as an actual being and not just as a single memory, he is preserved as a being in her mind and not contained into a single orb. And he spends most of the movie in this state as a memory that isn't forgotten, but one that is also never called upon. So instead, he's just allowed to roam freely throughout her mind. Until, of course, he falls victim to the memory dump. And so not so oddly, this exact phenomenon is the driving force behind the entire plot of Coco, which is why it should come as no surprise then that the City of the Dead looks like a much grander version of the human mind. Because rather than looking at just the single mind of a little girl, now we're looking at the collective memory of the entire country of Mexico. But the rules are pretty much the same. Sure, once a year, if your family puts your picture on the ofrenda, you can cross back over and accept an offering from them. But either way, as long as a single person remembers you, as long as one memory orb of you exists somewhere in someone's mind, you are allowed to continue living in the land of the dead. But if you are completely forgotten, much like Bing Bong at the end of Inside Out, you then suffer the final death. And this is the point of the Pixar theory, to actively remember those who came before you, to look back as a guide to the future, because those who are not forgotten aren't really gone. And this theme permeates every Pixar franchise. I mean, Bob Parr is afraid that if people forget the old ways, then Mr. Incredible will truly die. His true self, then, will really die. In Toy Story, Wheezy is sick because Andy has forgotten him. In Ratatouille, Gusteau's memory is being tarnished and Remy is out to set it straight. Carl can't let Ellie's memory die and carries it around as literal baggage until he finally realizes that instead of remembering her, he needs to live the way she wanted him to live. Dory's whole character is about memory, and she shows us tragically how terrible forgetting can be. I mean, without the ability to remember, she could have swam right up to her parents and not even realized who they were. Arlo is controlled by guilt and memory of his father's death, and fears he'll never make him proud until his dad's ghost literally appears to him and says,
You're me and more.
The Cars, on the other hand, as machines and not humans, are starkly not concerned with legacy. Both Lightning and Doc Hudson both scoff at it. But then there's the adorable little Wally, also a machine, but one who actively cares about remembering humans, and as such, what happens to grow right next to him? A little plant. And remember the brown earth? Well, another explanation might be that all of humanity has literally forgotten Earth. Even the captain has to ask the ship to look up what Earth is. But once he starts to remember, well... And finally, this brings us all the way back to where we started. Brave, inside a little witch's hut where the most important memory of them all lives. An image that has no business existing in medieval Scotland and yet is there all the same. It is a carving of none other than Sully. Because this is not just some random witch. This old lady is Boo. Oh, you need more proof? Well, for one, she's obsessed with bears, which Sully himself kind of resembles, and it might be how you remember him if you only ever saw him as a little girl. 2, she has a carving of the Pizza Planet truck right here, and that's like, what? Cars don't even exist yet. How would she even know what that is if she's not actually from the future? And 3, where did Sully come from when she was a little girl? A magic door. And what does the witch happen to have on her hut? A magic door. But so why does Boo become a witch? Well, the theory goes that she spends pretty much the rest of her life trying to track down her best friend from the closet, but can never find him. But personally, I think she figured it out. She obviously learned about time travel at some point, but for some reason has decided to stay in Scotland. But my question is then, why there? And the answer is again, memory, because she never wants Sully to suffer the final death. She never wants him to ever really be forgotten. And how do you fight that? By living in the past and remembering something from the future, effectively creating a permanent loop. As long as she stays here and ensures the events of Brave happen, she ensures the future, that she will always go on to be a little girl who meets Sully and that grows up trying to find him again and eventually come back to this point, always keeping the memory alive. And that is the Pixar theory. Then my question for you and everyone else is, what is your favorite Pixar movie? Let me know in the towel section down below. Thanks to the Pixar theory, for the last 6 years, YouTube has been our playground, and to celebrate, we've made brand new YouTube is our playground hoodies available now at supercarlinbrothers.store. Guys, thanks for watching. As always, please remember to leave a like on this video if you haven't, and subscribe so you don't miss any future Pixar action from us. If you want to see the truth about Andy's dad, you can check out this video right here, or if you want to see how the Incredibles might actually be living in Syndrome's house in Incredibles 2, you can check out this video right here. But Ben, that's all I've got for you today, man. I will see you in another life, brother. Oh, also, there was a colony of ants at some point. You can pretty much put them in wherever you want because they don't make a huge difference in the overall story.